Hey folks, it's been a morning of me trying to figure shit out and not nailing it, including my hair, which is awesome. The good news is I always have bad hair, so it doesn't feel like a compromise or an insult to my humanity. Please do consider subscribe, like, follow, all the things, share with your friends. I do have a Patreon. There's also like a tip option. Don't feel the need to support me financially. Like I say, I have a day job. I'm not, this is not my career or anything like that. And so, that's a thing. But if you want to, those options are there. And I appreciate anyone who wants to. It's just a nice way to, support me and be awesome. Yeah. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to actually go through Treaty 7. I don't expect to be smart or right or good. What I'm hopeful for is that it can start people who are watching thinking about stuff, especially the honkies like myself. My goal is not to look at Treaty 7 and be like, see, the GD indigenals or, like that. No. My goal is to look at things and try to understand the context a little bit and put that into a modern day context and also understand that original context that came from, many years ago. But I will get to that. I have a wasp that's building a nest like right outside of my door. I'm very excited about that. I've dealt with wasp nests in the past, but it's been a long time, and I'm like, how do I do that? Like, it's every time I've dealt with one, it's always been like in a shed or something where you can like burn the fucking thing down and just move to a new city. I've been stung enough in life, not just by winged things. That's one of my my few fears, is things that fly around my head and have stingers on their asshole. Not a big fan of them. Always been, and it used to be like a gripping terror. I found that when I had kids, I immediately like self-corrected the freak out behavior and learned to calm myself because I didn't want them to have the irrational fear. So thanks, kids. I think I'm funny. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sort of set the stage from Canada's perspective. And by Canada, I'm referring, that's probably the wrong way to phrase it. The Canadian government and the Queen, whose birthday is this week, and we should all celebrate, Queen Vicky. From that perspective, the driving factor for all of this was British Columbia. They wanted British Columbia to be a part of the Commonwealth of Canada. And British Columbia had basically said, okay, but we're very isolated out here. You have to build a railway to go from the eastern provinces to British Columbia so that we are connected and have some vibe that we can be a part of things. So that's a cool thing. They wanted to make sure that they were, a part of the country and not just like, swearing fealty and throwing money at someone that's far away and doesn't care about them, like America was doing and led to the American Revolution. That's actually a whole fascinating part of Canadian history. It actually led to Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald being kicked out of office because he couldn't get the job done with making this railway happen. And it ended up being a group of Scottish businessmen who came along, and after Sir John A. got reelected, they started this company called the Canadian Pacific Railway, and that's how they basically, they're the ones that took the project to completion, thus bringing the whole of the country from a honky perspective together. The territory that I live in is Treaty 7 land. And that territory was not ceded at the time. The Queen and the government of Canada didn't have any right to this land. They certainly knew that they couldn't just sort of set up shop without some kind of an agreement. So they let it be known that they were coming to have a yammer about what we're gonna do with regards to coming up with a treaty. And they had done this sort of across Canada in various ways to have these discussions and establish Canadian government of Canada Canadian space that they could do things like build a railway on and other things, moving in settlers and stuff. So I think that's a fairly reasonable description of the motivations of the Queen and the Canadian government. I would add in that they were racist AF, and I don't want to sound like I'm justifying, but that was the arrogant ignorance of the time. We were in the middle of a huge colonial thing, and we thought colonialism was super good. It was part of the white man's burden to go around the world and find all the poor, savage peoples and raise them to the level where they could learn about the Jesus. So, there may have been some negativity there. When it comes to the Indigenous perspective, I certainly cannot truly comment on anything in how they were feeling or how they are feeling now. This is me speculating based on what I've read, and I certainly leave the door wide open for me being wrong and stupid. So that said, here's my take on it. I think that there was a great deal of fear among Indigenous people about the way that the world was changing. There was a huge amount of not just like hunting buffalo, but like widespread slaughter of the buffalo. That was primarily the food source of Indigenous people in Alberta. Certainly not the only thing, but it was a good chunk of how they survived. And that hunting was coming from illegal hunting by settlers that were not supposed to be there. It was coming from Métis. There was a large amount of Métis people that were identified as like a real problem with this slaughter. And just sort of in general, things were a bit bleak. And there was this one of the things in the treaty, which we'll talk about, is a commitment to help them become more agrarian and learn to farm the land, which, when you're faced with a disappearing resource that is your food source, probably not a terrible step to take. The other thing, and I think this is a fair take, is that Indigenous people, and I'm painting with a wide brush, obviously, but certainly the Indigenous people in Alberta had historically been very committed to sharing and conversation, agreements rather than wars, that sort of thing. Alberta was large and largely empty, in the sense of like you weren't tripping over people, and I believe that the Indigenous people that lived here were more than content with the idea that there was plenty to go around, and that it would be better to share and to look after people than it would be to be all tyrannical and smashy and fight all the time. And there was the other thing I think factors into that from a perspective, and again, me guessing as a honky. I think that especially as the herds of buffalo and things were diminishing, the amount of time you had to spend in providing for yourself and your loved ones was getting more and more, and the idea of adding a war on top of that probably wasn't all that attractive. So in 1827, the Canadian government were like, we want to come have a job about this, figure things out, and the Indigenous people were like, yeah, cool, let's do that. Let's have a conversation. We'll be good to understand where you guys are at, where we're at. Well, let's have a jaw. I think there was a bunch of fear, also of this rather significant invading force, the colonial force. I think quite reasonably people were like, okay, we better play a little bit of ball here and have the conversation. So I'm going to bring open, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually go through what Treaty 7 says. And I'll show you how easy this is. Treaty 7 text. Look at that. And it's right on the Government of Canada's website. So this is the Order in Council setting up commission for Treaty Number 7. On a report dated the 28th of June 1877 from the Honourable Minister of the Interior, stating that it having been decided that a treaty should be made this year with the Blackfeet and other Indians occupying the unceded territory north of the boundary line, east of the Rocky Mountains, and west and south of Treaty Number 4 and 6, His Honourable Lieutenant Governor Laird was in the early part of the year instructed to notify the Indians that commissioners would be sent in the fall to negotiate a treaty with them at such time and place as His Honour might appoint for that purpose. Obviously, just painting the backdrop there. The key, though, is this word here, unceded territory. This is still a thing that we run into, and that we're largely as honkies, I think, ignorant about. The land was owned and fully, the property of Indigenous people, and that was what we wanted to change in having these conversations. So there are still areas that Indigenous people have not ceded territory, and they're still referred to as unceded territory. And that means that, contrary to what we may think about how Canada works, we have no right to do anything there or to barge in, or we shouldn't be doing that no matter what. But Indigenous people own the land that they're on. Even here in Treaty 7, the reservation land that they live on, they own outright. And so that's, last week I was talking about the letter that was sent in from the city of Calgary going like, okay, we're coming in, we're gonna make a ring road, and you better just fucking get over it. We're Canadians. They were like, no, you can't do that, and we'll not let you do that. And that's because that space is theirs. Technically, I think it kind of all qualifies. That I'm not sure exactly the way that ownership of Canada works. I know that the Queen owns it, and I know that Indigenous people own it, and I think that there's some I don't know, shit's weird. So anyways, that His Honour has advised the department that he has accordingly notified the Indians to assemble at Fort Macleod on the 13th of September next to meet the commissioners to be appointed to negotiate a treaty with them, that the necessary funds to meet the expense of the treaty have been duly provided in the estimates for the coming year. Yeah, so we've told people we're doing it, we gave them a date, and we budgeted to make sure we can, pay for it. Good. That the territory to be included in the proposed treaty is occupied by the Blackfeet, Crees, Sarcees, and Piegans, and may be estimated approximately about 35,000 square miles in area. I grew up metric, but only, I'm Canadian metric, so I don't know how many meters tall I am, but I know how many feet I am. That kind of, anyways, stupid. The Minister recommends that His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor of the Northwest Territories, and Lieutenant Colonel James F. McLeod, CMG, Commissioner of the Mounted Police, be appointed commissioners for the purpose of negotiating the proposed treaty. The committee submit the foregoing recommendations for approval, signed A. Mackenzie, blah, 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 blah. So the articles of the treaty, this is the important part. And this is the part that I feel like us honkies often don't have a clue about. I know I didn't have a clue what was actually in the treaty. If you were to ask me a year ago, I would have told you I have no idea. But if you had asked me to speculate, I would have said, well, I know that we took the land through this treaty, and that it established the legalities around that. There's a lot more here, and a lot less here in the sense of some of the nuance. We'll get to that. So made and concluded this 22nd day of September in the year of our Lord 1827, between Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland, by her commissioners, the Honourable David Laird, Lieutenant Governor and Indian Superintendent of the Northwest Territories, and James Farquharson McLeod, I'm going to guess that Commissioner of the Northwest Mounted Police of the one part, and the Blackfeet, Blood, Piegan, Sarcee, Stoney, and other Indians, inhabitants of the territory north of the United States boundary line, east of the central range of the Rocky Mountains, and south and west of Treaties Number 6 and 4 by their head chiefs and minor chiefs or counselors, chosen as hereinafter mentioned of the other part. So that's a lot of legal stuff that says this is the treaty between the most gracious Queen of Great Britain and Ireland and her people, Laird and McLeod, as well as the Blackfeet, Blood, Piegan, Sarcee, Stoney, and other Indians. I find it very telling that we specifically lavish praise on the Queen. We talk about her honorable charges, McLeod and Laird, and then we're like, and some brown people. Whereas the Indians inhabiting the said territory have, pursuant to an appointment made by the said commissioners, been convened in a meeting at the Blackfoot crossing of the Bow River to deliberate upon certain matter. Okay, we're just saying, yes, we have done the conversation. And whereas the said Indians have been informed by Her Majesty's commissioners that it is the desire of Her Majesty to set up for settlement and such other purposes as to Her Majesty may seem meet, attractive country, bounded and described as hereinafter mentioned, and to obtain the consent thereto of her Indian subjects inhabiting the said tract, and to make a treaty and arrange with them so that there may be peace and goodwill between them and Her Majesty, and between them and Her Majesty's other subjects, and that her Indian people may know and feel assured of what allowance they are to count upon and receive from Her Majesty's bounty and benevolence. That part is an important thing. The impression I had was like we showed up, and the good impression I had was we basically showed up and said, "Hey, we'll save your lives, and here's some stuff, and we'll give you stuff." The uglier side, as I grew up and learned more and more about things, was more the sort of military might and fear and stuff. The truth is somewhere far different than this, and definitely between both points on the ladder on the spectrum, whatever you want to call it. There was positives and negatives, especially from the Indigenous perspective, that were hoping to be addressed by this treaty. We were asking for essentially attractive country in exchange for things from the allowance they are to count upon and receive from Her Majesty's bounty and benevolence. Now, this is where I think we did not live up to our side of the agreement, but also very importantly, B, I think that this is where a lot of the concern around the treaty comes from, and we'll explain all of that. And whereas the Indians of the said tract duly convened in council and being requested by Her Majesty's commissioners to present their head chiefs and minor chiefs or counselors who shall be authorized on their behalf, so these are the people that we're going to include, have therefore acknowledged for that purpose the several head and minor chiefs and the said Stoney Indians, the chiefs and counselors who have described as and whereas the said commissioners have proceeded to negotiate a treaty with the said Indians, and the same has been finally agreed upon and concluded as follows. That is to say, the Blackfeet, Blood, Piegan, Sarcee, Stoney, and other Indians inhabiting blah 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 do hereby cede, release, surrender, and yield up to the government of Canada for Her Majesty the Queen and her successors forever all their rights, titles, and privileges whatsoever to the lands included within the following limits. That is to say, this is a serious bone of contention because, again, my understanding from the research that I've done wasn't that the Queen, what am I trying to say? It wasn't that the Indigenous people that were here were looking for, we definitely want to get rid of all this terrible shit land that we've got, and we really, we want you to take it. This, from all that I've read, this was very much intended as a conversation around, we have stuff, we will share it with you. That is quite different than saying that you cede forever. hereby cede, release, surrender, and yield up to the government of Canada for Her Majesty the Queen and successors forever all their rights, titles, and privileges whatsoever to the lands included within the following limits. That's a big difference, right? And I think it's an important thing to be aware of, that I don't believe, from what what research I've done, that this was at all what was intended. Now, clearly, the agreement says these things. The agreement says, "Yep, we're giving you everything, and we will, receive from you some bounty to be described later." But from the research I've done, I don't think that they were aware of the fact that this is what they were giving up. Again, the idea was, we see there are people that are coming. Let's establish a conversation. Let's say we can share. We can, we're good. And then that kind of went sideways. I feel like that's an easy thing to understand in the sense of what the world was at the time, the arrogance of the British, and the lack of previous encounter with, obviously the Indigenous people had met white people before, but the true image and understanding of white society at the time, and colonization and all of these things, you couldn't factor those in. Not only was there language barriers, they're speaking through translators. So not only did you have this language barrier and this two very, very different cultural groups essentially clashing. If you were an Indigenous person in this scenario, and you heard that there were people that were coming that were interested in having a conversation about basically, coexisting from the perspective, that's a conversation that probably should be, decided on with an understanding of the other party. And, I don't believe the Indigenous knew about how the British Empire had gone. I don't believe the Indigenous knew about what England looked like. If you think about the experience of Indigenous people at that point, was largely a hunter-gatherer society that was sort of at the point where they were considering moving towards an agrarian society. That's wildly different than a people who are living in giant, dirty, filthy cities with industrialization and, chimneys spewing smog and the stench of London and all that stuff. That idea that this might be the end result of this treaty probably did not factor into this equation, and couldn't have factored into this equation because of the fact that Indigenous people weren't in on the joke. Joke being the wrong word, but you know what I mean. That's a spectacularly unique thing about that time in history. Because when we talk about it now, we think about today, and we're like, well, they gave us all the land, they knew what they were doing. No, I don't think they did. I don't think, and this isn't those poor people were so dumb or anything like that. It was simply the world that they encountered to that point in their existence was completely different than the world that they were interacting with, and couldn't have, this could not have made sense. That's, again, speculation. I could be 100% wrong. I'm a honky here. All right, so this is about the actual boundaries. I don't think it's important to go over. The key is the rights and titles and privileges whatsoever to all other lands, whether situated in the Northwest Territories or in any other portion of the Dominion of Canada. So what that means is it's not just that you're giving us this space, but you are giving up any other space you may sometimes use. You are, essentially when we drew on the lines of what would become the space owned by the Indigenous, that was it. There was no freedom of movement, which, the indigenous people who lived here did. So they were giving up essentially everything to Canada. And Her Majesty the Queen hereby agrees with her said Indians that they shall have the right to pursue their vocations of hunting throughout the tract surrendered as heretofore described, subject to such regulations as may from time to time be made by the government of the country, acting under the authority of Her Majesty, and saving and accepting such tracts as may be required or taken up from time to time for settlement, mining, trading, or other purposes by her government of Canada, or by any of Her Majesty's subjects duly authorized therefore by the said government. That is a surprisingly cagey statement. Not in a bad way. I don't think this isn't, to me, as someone who doesn't know shit about shit, this isn't one of those things that makes me go, aha, we were shitty in this. What we're essentially saying is, in the space that we give you, you certainly, and throughout the Treaty 7 lands, you're well entitled to hunting and fishing and your traditional vocations, which probably wasn't as smug shitty as I read it, because at the time that was their vocations, and this was basically us saying, and us in the royal sense, saying like, okay guys, we're going to be having this treaty and there's a finite amount of space involved, but in that space you can live your life as you always have, with certain exceptions that, if we're looking for, a place to set up a settlement, like a city, for example, or a town at the time, mining, trading, spaces that are designed for commerce, that kind of thing, then in that case, stay out. But essentially, at least don't hunt. You can't go hunting in the middle of our town. Or hunting when we're trying to do mining and trading and stuff. It's somewhat open-ended, but also somewhat not open-ended, in the sense that it makes clear that there will be space that is off limits for hunting and fishing, but at the same time, the rest you can feel free to use freely and with no bullshittery from us. The part that's a little bit grainy is when we start talking about taken up from time to time. What does that even mean? It is also agreed between Her Majesty and her said Indians that reserves shall be assigned them of sufficient area to allow 1 square mile for each family of 5 persons, or in that population for larger and smaller families, and that said reserve shall be located as follows. That is to say, first, the reserves of the Blackfeet blood and Sarcee shall consist of a belt of land. So this again is the specifics of where things will be. I'll try and sort of skim this a bit. So an average width of 4 miles along the rivers, the Saskatchewan, South Saskatchewan, and the Bow, commencing at the Bow River 20 miles northwesterly of the Blackfoot Crossing and extending to the Red Deer River. So essentially, this is all about giving the specifics of where the reservation land is going to be, and it's interesting. So with Ladder Reserve, reserving to Her Majesty as may now or hereafter be required for her the use of her Indians and other subjects from all the reserves herein before described, the right to navigate the above mentioned rivers, to land and receive fuel cargoes on the shores and banks thereof, to build bridges and establish ferries thereon, to use the fords thereof and all of the trails leading thereto, and to open such other roads through the said reserves as may appear to Her Majesty's Government of Canada necessary for the ordinary travel of her Indian and other subjects, due to compensation being paid to individual Indians for improvements when the same may be in any manner encroached upon by such roads. This is an important thing in recent times. So someone giving a cursory skim of this can be like, oh, okay, so we're allowed to travel by boat on the rivers, we're allowed to build bridges, establish ferries, and more importantly, we're allowed to open such other roads through the said reserves as may appear to Her Majesty's Government of Canada necessary for the ordinary travel. In other words, looking at the Ring Road, which was very, very recent history, and in fact is still essentially ongoing, The government of Canada was not necessarily the ones that determined that this would be unnecessary for the ordinary travel of her Indian and other subjects. The city of Calgary did. They're not within their right to just open such other roads. And this is a key thing that we failed at in that initial interaction with the Treaty 7 people, saying that, hey, we're just going to build this fucking road and get out of the way. We'll give you some money. We'll, whatever. Just, we're doing it. This was not the government of Canada or Her Majesty the Queen. And it wasn't necessary for the ordinary travel of her Indian and other subjects. It's a nice thing. A ring road on a city of this size is a handy dandy doodly doo. I'm 100% on board with that. What's not necessary though, like it isn't required. It's nice. Oh, Jesus, I can hear children outside talking about stupid children things, and they're like teens, so they're high and stupid. Essentially, what they were doing was they were they were taking people or taking land and saying we're going to build this ring road. In some cases, that affected people. There's a very, very powerful video from the day of the I think it was the ribbon cutting on the ring road, but I could be wrong. But essentially, it was a bunch of important figures from chiefs and council and from the mayor's office and whatnot, doing this ceremony. And there was a young man, Seth. I can't remember his last name for the life of me, but he spoke very passionately and eloquently about the fact that his family didn't have a choice, that his family was essentially kicked out of their home. And I believe there was some compensation, but it wasn't a conversation that he was a part of. It was an agreement made by chiefs and council, and he felt very betrayed. And he ended up cutting off his braids, which it's easy to be like, oh, well, yeah, that's a powerful statement, cutting off his braids. It is a much more powerful statement than I think us honkies truly get, and was really a powerful moment. Even I, not knowing what the fuck I'm talking about at the time, was like, whoa, dude. And then the next sections we talk about the Reserve of the Peigan, the Reserve of the Stoney. So Peigan is on the Old Man River near the foot of the Porcupine Hills, Crow's Nest Pass, essentially. I don't know, not Crow's Nest, Crow's Creek, sorry. And then the Stoney are in the vicinity of Morleyville, which is the town of Morley. In view of the satisfaction of Her Majesty with the recent general good conduct of her said Indians, and in extinguishment of all their past claims, she hereby, through her commissioners, agrees to make them a present payment of $12 each in cash, to each man, woman, and child in the families here represented. So this was essentially any agreements we've already come to, let's just get rid of them, and we'll have we're going to do a one-time as like a signing bonus here. We're going to give each family, or each man, woman, and child of the families $12 each, which at the time, let's do a little jump. What was $12 worth in 1827? What was $1 worth in 1827? So, fuck, I don't even know what I'm looking at here. Jesus. Inflation calculator. This is what I want to see. So, $12 in 1827, end year 2021, $320.46. So not like and this is in terms of like current buying power, right? So not like, oh wow, this is riches, but every single person got handed the equivalent of $320 for basically as a signing bonus for coming to this agreement. Her Majesty also agrees that next year and annually afterwards forever, she will cause to be paid to the said Indians in cash at suitable places and dates of which the said Indians shall be duly notified, to each chief $25, each minor chief or counselor, not exceeding 15 minor chiefs to the Blackfoot and Blood Indians. They give numbers because of, I think, based on the size of bands. $15, and to every other Indian of whatever age, $5. The same unless there be some exceptional reason to be paid to the heads of families of these begun here too. Now, this is an interesting thing, because I just made the assumption, real quick, let's just look at, so $5 in 1827 would have been the equivalent of $133.53 today. Now, that's an important thing, because I just made the assumption that that money would, adjust for inflation. It fucking doesn't. And I know this because I was talking with, I think it was my buddy Norm, and I made mention of this $5 thing, and he was like, oh yeah, we still get that. We still have, there's a thing. And he might have been pulling my honky leg, but I don't think he was. It's like there's a thing where we, that day, we all go down to, wherever the appropriate place is, and we get our $5, and I was like, it's $5. We didn't adjust for inflation, because there is a real difference between a forever afterwards paying someone annually $5, the equivalent of $133.53, and $5, the equivalent of $5. You can't even buy a fucking sandwich for that. So that's just a quirky little thing. All right. So further, Her Majesty agrees to the sum of $2,000 shall hereafter every year be expended in the purchase of ammunition for distribution among the said Indians, provided if at any future time ammunition becomes comparatively unnecessary for said Indians, her government, with the consent of said Indians or any of the bands thereof, may expend the proportion due to such band otherwise for their benefit. So essentially what this is saying is, we will give you $2,000 every year in ammunition. And using our little currency converter here, $2,000 then would be $53,410 for distribution among said Indians. And then if in the future ammunition is no longer comparatively necessary, government, with the consent of the people in question, will allow that money to basically be used for other things. So we should be paying just for specifically this thing around either $2,000, which is ridiculous, or $53,000. At the time, getting $53,000 every year for ammunition would have been extremely helpful and extremely necessary. The times they was a lot rougher. And so that to me is an interesting thing. One of the major concerns that gets raised about Treaty 7 is that we did not do this. Further, Her Majesty agrees that each head chief and minor chief and each chief and councillor duly recognized as such shall, once in every 3 years during the term of office, receive a suitable suit of clothing, and each head chief and stony chief, in recognition of the closing of the treaty, a suitable medal and flag, and next year, or as soon as convenient, blah blah blah, receive a Winchester rifle. I think it's hilarious that Winchester specifically, like they actually say, we're going to give you a Winchester rifle. To me, this is a strange bit of an anachronism, because I don't really get conceptually why this is there. In my assumption, it is that when we do these kinds of get together and chat things, we want you to come dressed like one of us, a suitable suit of clothing. I may be reading that wrong. I genuinely don't know, if I am or not. So please don't quote me on this. But it's an interesting thing that essentially every 3 years they get a suit of clothes, medal, flag, all of that stuff. Further, Her Majesty agrees to pay the salary of such teachers to instruct the children of said Indians as to her government of Canada may seem advisable when said Indians are settled on their reserves and shall desire teachers. So essentially saying we're going to cover the cost of sending teachers to the reservations to teach. And I think this is a contentious issue because I don't think it happened as well as we think it happened. It certainly would not be accurate to say that there are no teachers on Indigenous land in Alberta under the Treaty 7 lands, but I feel like there's reasonable room to complain about the quality of and access to education in those places, but I'm by no means an expert. Further, Her Majesty agrees to supply each head or minor chief and each stony chief for use of their bands 10 axes, 5 handsaws, 5 augers, 1 grindstone, and the necessary files and whetstones. Okay, they're going to give them some agrarian equipment. And further, Her Majesty agrees that said Indians shall be supplied as soon as convenient, after any band shall make due application therefore with the following cattle for raising stock. That is to say, for every family of 5 persons and under 2, or 5 persons and under, 2 cows. For each family of more than 5 persons and less than 10 persons, 3 cows. For every family of over 10 persons, 4 cows, and every head or minor chief and every stony chief for the use of their bands, 1 bull. But if any band desire to cultivate the soil as well as raise stock, each family of such band shall receive 1 cow less than the above mentioned number, and in lieu thereof, when settled on their reserves and prepared to break up the soil, 2 hoes, 1 spade, 1 scythe, and 2 hay forks. And for every 3 families, 1 plow, and 1 harrow, and for each band enough potatoes, barley, oats, and wheat, if such seeds be suited to the locality of their reserves, to plant the land actually broken up. All the aforesaid articles to be given once for all for the encouragement of the practice of agriculture among the Indians. Again, this was a sort of big point for why the Indigenous people here were open to this, is their traditional way of living was being threatened and being essentially taken away. Not necessarily entirely by us honkies, but the fact was that the buffalo were declining. And there, I think, was a very real sense that they needed to make this shift into an agrarian society and probably didn't know how to go about that. So they, this, in my mind, is the Queen saying, we get it, partially causing it, but we get it, and we want to help. We want to give you the things that you need to be able to make this shift to a more agrarian society. You can still, have farming. We'll give you some cows and stuff, but we'll also give you other things that will help you in working the land. You'll notice though, it doesn't say we're going to teach you how to use it. And the undersigned Blackfeet, Blood, Pagan, and Sarsi head chiefs and minor chiefs and stony chiefs and councillors on their own behalf and on behalf of all other Indians inhabiting the tract within ceded, do hereby solemnly promise and engage to strictly observe this treaty and also to conduct and behave themselves as good and loyal subjects of Her Majesty the Queen. They promise and engage that they will, in all respects, obey and abide by the law, that they will maintain peace and good order between each other and between themselves and other tribes of Indians, and between themselves and others of Her Majesty's subjects, whether Indians, half-breeds, or whites. Half-breeds, God, just saying that feels horrible. Now inhabiting, or hereafter, to inhabit any part of the said ceded tract, and that they will not molest the person or property of any inhabitant of such ceded tract, or the property of Her Majesty the Queen, or interfere with or trouble any person passing or traveling through the said tract of any part thereof, and that they will assist the officers of Her Majesty in bringing to justice and punishment any Indian offending against the stipulations of this treaty or infringing the laws in force in the country so ceded. This, I think, is interesting. You'll notice that all of the things here are about what the Indigenous people had to do. They had to be good, they had to not fight, they had to not be jerks, and they had to respect both each other and the settlers that were coming in. Fine. I don't remember reading anywhere in there anything about how they were to be treated in return. That's pretty telling in my opinion. How they were treated in return was, generally speaking, pretty shitty. And they're, the endemic racism of the time and of, today, there was no sense of, and no back and forth here to say that, we will conduct and behave ourselves as good and loyal partners in this agreement. That's a thing that I don't imagine there was malice in the writing of this per se. I think it was more the ignorance of the time, and they're saying like, well, of course we'll be great. We're wonderful. We're Her Majesty's subjects. But you guys need to understand that you can't just be all, running around all Indian-y. And then we have the people who signed. And so these are the names of the people who signed the treaty. And I think there is an after part. We, the members of the Blackfoot Tribe of Indians, having had explained to us the terms of our treaty, between Her Majesty the Queen and commissions duly appointed, blah, blah, blah. We hereby accept the several benefits, payments, and reserves promised to the Indians under the chiefs, adhering to the treaty and Blackfoot. Oh, yeah. So essentially, just we agree and we'll do our thing. So that is Treaty 7. But that's not the end of our conversation about it. I'm going to take me a smoke break. And then when I'm back, I want to talk a little bit more looking at, did we live up to those terms? First off, I want to say thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed, please like and subscribe. It really does help me out. Thank you to my patrons that support me on Patreon. I am a little streamer, and these people are all really awesome for supporting me. First, to the followers, those diabolical souls who hear the words and give of themselves, your faith shall be rewarded. Thank you to I Am Canadian. My next tier is the prophets, those who receive the whispered truths before the masses, who hear the word and speak it smugly before other people get to. Special huge thanks go to my one prophet, Shithead Dave Anderson. And of course, my final tier of supporters is the gods. This tier is the most expensive and likely to never have any members, but Patreon really told me I should have one, so it's true, I guess. There are no gods. If you want to be a patron, head over to www.patreon.com/BigUglyJim and sign up, and you too can get a hearty, rousing, full of love thanking. I try to put up stuff at least once a week, and I live stream every Saturday at noon Mountain Time on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, like an old man. Again, thanks for watching, and have a kick-ass day.